Hello, everybody from the Energy Realities podcast. Welcome for our end of year special. We hope everybody had a fabulous Christmas and didn't get into too many arguments and fights with family over the holidays. You never know these days. Today, we have our amazing panel. We have Irina Slav from Bulgaria, who writes for oilprice.com and has an amazing Substack, which is Irina Slav on energy.substack. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. And welcome, Irina. Then we've got Stu Turley, the amazing Stu Turley with the Sandstone Group, who does Energy Newsbeat. Stu, do you have a Substack?
I do. It is theenergynewsbeat.substack.com.
Awesome. Great. Hope you had a great Christmas, and we're looking forward to all this. And then we've got David Blackmon, the op-ed writer extraordinaire, who writes for lots of different publications and has a great Substack. David, what's your Substack?
It is Energy Transition Absurdities. It's a target-rich environment.
Yes, there's like an endless supply of material for energy absurdities. Absolutely. And I'm sure it'll get worse in the year to come. And then there's myself, Tammy Nemeth. I have a Substack at thenemethreport.substack.com, as well as my website, thenemethreport.com, where all of my different things are all on there. So today we are going to talk about, well, I think we should probably review a little bit of what the highlights were of 2024, and then offer our amazing crystal ball gazing for 2025 energy predictions. So, guys, should we do a little bit of a review, or do you want to go straight into predictions?
Yeah, no, I think a review is great.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about we do like our top 3 or something of 2024? Would that be okay?
Okay.
You bet.
All right. Okay, so Irina, what do you think?
You're on the spot, Irina.
David was nodding first. Maybe we should go with David. David, what's your top 3?
Okay, I'll go. So, I mean, I think in the United States, we'll just put it that way. In the United States, the top 3 were the ongoing collapse of our electric vehicle manufacturing sector in this country. Every company trying to make electric vehicles in America other than Tesla is in serious financial trouble, at least in the business segments. At Ford, GM, Stellantis are all bleeding billions of dollars every year with no real end in sight to that because of flattening demand for electric vehicles in this country. Rivian was bailed out by, was it Volvo or Toyota that bailed them out? Volvo, I believe, with a $5.8 billion infusion of money to save them from bankruptcy. Fisker went into bankruptcy. Canoo, a business van maker that never really got off the ground, is about to go into bankruptcy, and all the rest are in severe financial difficulty, the pure play EV companies. So that's, one big story this year. Second big story was the Biden administration's pause on LNG permitting. I think got more attention than anything else, and all the stupidity and really just false justifications for that, abjectly false science, and the need for this study that DOE had already conducted in 2022, and they fooled around for 11 months and then finally released a revised version of it in December. That was just a farce led by Jennifer Granholm, probably the worst, most inept energy secretary ever to hold that job. Thank God she's going to be gone in 22 days. And we'll have a real energy secretary named Chris Wright to take her place. The third story, I think, in the United States, third big story, was the rapid growth of solar, build out of solar, and the slowing of the wind business at the same time. New wind installations onshore slowed to barely a trickle, as local communities fight back against them. The offshore wind build out in the Northeast that was such a pet project of the Biden administration is an abject failure and probably is going to go away due to the policies in the next administration. And I'm really looking forward to the collapse of that segment because it's incredibly destructive, killed all manner of whales and other marine mammals. We all know it. And still continues to litter the beaches along the shoreline of Nantucket Island due to the blade, the gigantic 300-foot long blade that collapsed off of one of the turbines and just released all these particles of fiberglass and other dangerous materials into the ocean. And it's a mess created by an administration that had no idea really what it was doing other than wasting money. And thank God it's almost over.
Okay, those are great. They were on my list. Irina, what are your top three?
Thanks for giving me time to collect myself. Well, first of all, this was the year when Queens completely took over the oil market, or should I say algorithms. Everyone fixated on China. I swear 90% of all oil news reports began with concern about Chinese demand. So the oil market is completely being ruled by software and people who make predictions based on software, like models. Even though global inventories are declining and OPEC Plus is continuing to withhold supply, and I think the hopes for non-OPEC output growth are over-optimistic, and this might be revealed next year. But that's one of the most important thing I noticed this year. The other big story for me was Germany and its energy policies, because we saw what happens when you're being stupid with your energy. I actually checked the other day on electricity maps where Germany was getting its energy. The wind was blowing that day, so it was generating quite a lot of electricity from wind. And the biggest source of electricity that day was from coal, lignite coal.
Yeah.
So Germany was pretty brown. And yeah. And the third, and I want to say the UK, but it's the same as Germany. We have these two countries that really showed us how the energy transition was working. But actually, the third story would be the complete breakdown of the transition narrative, because as we had been talking about it, we have been predicting it. And this year, we saw the first really big cracks in the narrative. I mean, coal demand was at a record. Oil demand continued growing despite China's record EV sales and all that. And yeah, that's just, it's not working. The transition is not working, and we saw this really, really clearly this year.
Excellent. Yeah, I think those are like the constant themes that we talk about, is the energy transition that isn't, at least the way central planners are thinking about it. Stu, what are your top three takeaways from 2024?
I think David and Irina did a great job on those. I want to add the Chevron deference in the U.S. because that is allowing the United States to step away from the deep state overreach.
Yeah.
Do what?
Right. That is a great catch. I'm embarrassed.
That is. Well, you got to leave something for me, David. And so the other thing is that both as Irina did say, that I think the big story is not only that the world is waking up and saying, I don't mind an EV, don't force it down my throat. Don't force me to do this. And so you have Germany, New York, New Jersey, California, the UK, just as you all talked about, fiscal responsibility is failing. And so that is the other major story, is the fiscal responsibility of bad energy policies. And we're going to see more and more of that coming out, is that with no natural gas, I'm going to also add up the energy, the further along, the more money that is invested in wind and solar means more fossil fuels will be used. Call it Turley's Law if you want. It is now again proven again true for this year. I'm going through the numbers again. And the more money spent on renewable energy means more fossil fuels will be used. And the demand for oil is not there yet. Peak oil demand is not done yet.
Excellent. Okay. So coming up last, I get to try and fill in the blanks. So you guys covered everything, right? So I'm going to segue into the oil we haven't reached peak oil yet, and we haven't reached peak coal yet either, which is also linked to what Irina was saying. And I think this is one of the biggest stories, is that coal has refused to die. All this beyond coal, we're going to stop coal, all this. And yet here, coal numbers are huge, especially in China, India, and parts of Asia that, natural gas isn't for countries like India or Pakistan and other Asian countries. Natural gas is expensive to come by, and coal is domestic and easier to develop, reliable. And then this links to how I would reinforce what Irina said about shifting narratives. Last week we talked about energy coexistence, this new narrative that it's about energy addition and using what's the best fit for your regional market, versus, the central planners telling you it must be this, it must be that, where everything is through mandate rather than what actually works. So I think those two are really important, the coal one and the shifting narrative. And then I think I too had on my list the Europe and UK. I would call them energy transition woes. So I'm not going to go into details about the deindustrialization, but that has been a big story this past year. But I would throw a little bit over to Canada. And this year, the big story near the end has been a federal cap on oil and gas emissions in Canada, which is ludicrous. Then the ever increasing carbon tax. They also announced their clean electricity regulations that would basically ban any kind of fossil fuel on the grid. Then they had this ridiculous plastics registry that nobody's talking about, where companies are responsible for registering their plastic and where it goes, how it's recycled, and it's ridiculous. And then my number 3 story would be the sustainability disclosure standards in Europe and Canada. These are taking hold, and I think European companies are going to be in big trouble trying to comply. The burden financially and just in how you do it is extreme and very costly. So for industries that are already under attack from high energy prices and lots of regulation, here's one more to add to the mix and make things more difficult.
Yeah. Tammy, I loved what Qatar did when they said that you want us to go ahead and do scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. No. Have a great day. And that's going to be a real problem.
Yes, if the U.S. industry would do the same thing, then it would be an enormous problem.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think that would be one of my predictions for the next year is the fallout from that and what will happen. But we can go into that. So
whoops.
What did Robert say there?
I don't know if we want that or not.
Okay.
We're not going to read that for our podcast.
Yeah, all your listeners tune into the video at some point.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
But but Tammy, we've got India just had the largest solar farm, and Irina and I were laughing about this just before the show, and that is wind and waves happen on the ocean. Now, why would you put it's amazing. Why would you do this? This is India's largest solar farm, and it's destroyed.
Wow.
Okay, now how much money, I want to ask, how much money was wasted in fiscal irresponsibility on that bad dog? How about the waste panels now, that those are more toxic? And I've seen reports that solar panel waste is more toxic than all of the nuclear fleets combined in the world.
So I'm wondering if that was a World Bank or IMF funded project.
Maybe part of those, 41 billion that got lost.
They're missing what, $40 billion?
The World Bank is 41 billion in clean tech finance. Yeah.
Oops.
Sorry.
Maybe it's there. I don't know. But you're right about the pollution. So, they're worried about microplastics and all that kind of stuff. So when those are breaking down in the water, what is that doing to the sea life? And then if people are fishing there, what are they going to be ingesting from the fish? So yeah, not good.
Yeah, but the important thing is that the European Union approved new rules for bottle caps. That's what's important.
Yay, EU and their amazing directives.
Yeah. And they approved that universal USB standard. Yay! You didn't hear that? Yeah.
When did the Nord Stream 2 blow up? Was that January last year?
No, it was in April or May of 2022.
2022. Okay.
Just a few months after the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Might have been in June that year. Anyway.
I think it was September.
After the peace talks were scuttled, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe so. Yeah. Well, I'm sure. Yes, of course.
It's been a while since it happened, and we still don't know who did it.
Yeah, the CIA had to scuttle the peace talks before it could blow up the pipeline. I mean, let's be
That's right. About that. There's no going back, right? You burn the boats.
There's no going back.
Which is interesting for the predictions. So that's a nice segue into what our top 5 predictions are for 2025. And if people don't have 5, if you want to settle for 3, that's okay. So we'll go in a bit of reverse order. So Stu, we'll start with you. What are some of your top predictions for 2025 as we gaze in the crystal ball?
My gaze into the crystal ball, I've already failed, or I've missed a few dates as of now, because I figured that Germany, after Chancellor Scholz, I see nothing. Chancellor Scholz, that was a joke. Sorry, that was a very bad joke. But he has had 3 calls asking for Russian natural gas again. And there's a story out there saying that now the Slavic president is calling that he may have on his crystal ball for 2025 that an American company would buy the remains of the Nord Stream project. And if you think about it, if you get it pennies on the dollar, you have one of them is still there. You have gas. You can have cash flow immediately to repair the other ones, and you're off and running. I predicted that we would see cheap Russian natural gas flowing already, but Zelensky's Ukraine pass-through is going to set to expire on Wednesday, and that is going to be a major problem. And for the Ukrainian people, it's going to relegate Ukraine to 4th world status as far as an energy country is. It is 5% of their GDP as a country. And if you're a poor, war-torn country, you need to have revenues rolling through. It is stupid to let that thing stop.
Yeah, but look at all those billions that the Biden administration is throwing at the Ukraine. I mean, these are hundreds of billions.
Right.
They should.
But that's going to end.
They theoretically.
So that would be one, is that I think the Russian natural gas will be flowing again in 2025. And I think that cheap Russian natural gas is going to be, you're going to have Germany, you're going to have all of the other countries either take cheap Russian natural gas or regime changes will happen. So there's one of them. I think we will not see peak coal. And I think Irina nailed it in peak oil is not done yet. We are going to be seeing a pushback. You're seeing a failure of the EV markets. Now take a look at the news last week with Japan's automakers, all three big ones looking to merge. You're going to see them try to survive. And it is realigning, even though you have the EV markets. Irina Slav, this wonderful, brilliant woman, wrote an article on this, on why even with the EVs that are doing well, oil demand is still there. That was a great article.
Thank you. I was just stating the obvious. I always feel really uncomfortable when I'm stating the obvious. It is out there for everyone to see. And I'm getting this reaction as if it's some great revelation. It's not. It's like saying the sun rises in the east and sets in the west.
I'm going to write these down. I've got mine written down, and I'm going to be more precise. I can't even talk. How can I be precise? And so, yes, we'll have these out in an article.
Good. And
Cornelia has a great comment
a predictions piece at Forbes every year, every January. So I'll be putting mine in a Forbes column.
Oh, great! Then
I'm going to be doing a different one for the Daily Caller this week too. So.
Okay, so David, then what are your predictions? If you're going to give us a little preview from your Daily Caller and Forbes.
So I'm going to start with some obvious things. Donald Trump will pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord on his first day in office, January 20th. It's something he's promised to do. He will follow through on that. So that's one. Second has to do with the active rig count in the United States, which has dropped fairly dramatically for 3 consecutive years. It fell by about 15% in 2022, about 16% in 2023, and about 12% this year. I'm going to predict it's going to kind of flatten out in 2024 or 2025, but will still end up decreasing by something around 5 to 10%, somewhere in there. And that's mainly going to be due to soft commodity prices, okay, for both oil and natural gas will continue. We've got an oversupplied market today. It's going to continue to be oversupplied. And so the rig count's going to continue to drop. That said, in the United States, because the industry's become so efficient at increasing return rates out of each new shale well they drill, with advancing technologies, with more sophisticated frac fluids, with longer laterals in these big shale areas, they're going to continue to increase overall U.S. production of both oil and natural gas. And so it seems counterintuitive, but it's happened for 3 years in a row. It's going to continue to happen. And so that also plays into the prevailing wisdom, which I think is fading at this point, finally, that the Trump administration is going to bring back the whole drill, baby drill thing we saw in his first term, when both the Permian Basin and the DJ Basin up in Denver and the Bakken were all in their drilling boom phases. That drill, baby drill philosophy, resulted in a huge drilling boom during those 4 years. That's not going to happen this time because all these shale plays have become more mature. They're now in their development phase, which is just the natural progression of any oil and gas play area. And so even though the policies are going to be more favorable for oil and gas, you're not going to see a big drilling boom. You'll see more drilling on federal lands during 2025. because the Trump administration will go back to holding regular lease sales that have been held up for completely ridiculous and absurd reasons by the Interior Department and Secretary Deb Haaland in the Biden administration. That will end. You'll also see increased production from the U.S. offshore for the same reasons. We're going to start doing lease sales again and issuing permits again. Trump will also issue rescind the Biden permitting pause order on LNG infrastructure, the most unjustified policy action other than the cancellation of Keystone XL that the Biden administration engaged in. Just really stupid, counterproductive policy. And what else was I going to predict? I think we all need to think about this. And I'm not making a prediction here, but I think it's becoming a legitimate question globally, whether we're going to achieve, which will we achieve first, peak oil or peak coal? And I think it's a legitimate question because of the need for developing nations to have affordable, reliable, 24/7 power generation to develop their economies and rise out of squalor. I think coal demand is going to continue to rise for the foreseeable future, just as oil probably is going to continue to rise for some additional years. And 2 years ago, I would have said, well, we're going to reach peak coal long before we reach peak oil. Now I think it's a legitimate question and something to watch in the coming years, whether we get to peak oil before we get to peak coal. And that's, again, counterintuitive, given this whole fake energy transition we're supposedly engaged in. But it's become a legitimate question now. Then the other thing I wanted to just also emphasize here is that the EV industry in the U.S. is an exception to the rule, and Europe are exceptions to the global rule, that the EV industries are expanding pretty rapidly. EV adoption is expanding pretty rapidly in China, in Indonesia, and in these other Pacific Rim areas of the world. And I suspect EV adoption will speed up in developing nations before it makes any sort of a recovery in the United States and Europe. And that's a trend that I think we'll see continue to develop here in 2025. So those are the main ones I wanted to emphasize here.
Those are all fantastic, David. Thank you. I'm curious about the EV adoption one in Southeast Asia. I wonder if this is just a premature blip on there, because I'm thinking about what happens when those batteries stop working 5 years from now.
Yeah.
And what then happens to those vehicles. And
right. I do too.
Yeah.
Too. And that's always going to be a problem that the EV industry just doesn't seem capable of addressing. And, when people realize, you go buy a Tesla, it's wonderful. They're beautiful cars. And you think, well, this is cool. I paid $100,000 for it. That's it. And then, 3 years later, you've got about 60,000 miles on the car and you got to spend $20,000, $25,000 replacing the battery. That's going to be a severe limiter, in most parts of the world. And I just question whether governments can continue to sustain these subsidies into perpetuity, because that's the only way governments are trying to resolve that issue for the EV industry, since the industry can't do it itself. But for the time being, I think these flatlining of demand in the U.S. and Europe is kind of an exception to the global rule that deserves watching here in the coming years.
Good point. Irina, what's your predictions for 2025?
Okay, I'll try to come up with more than two. I think I could. Now, for starters, chronologically, Europe will freeze in January. I'm just not sure if it will freeze from literal cold or it will freeze when it freezes its electricity bills, because this deal is ending. Zelensky made it clear, then Putin had enough and said, okay, we're not giving you gas. So there will be no gas. It wasn't a lot of gas going through that pipeline, but it was enough to make everyone nervous now that it's expiring. So that there would be American LNG, but the price will match the demand. So maybe they won't freeze literally, but there will be trouble, financial trouble. And then going forward, bills will only get higher because of the amazing energy policies that all these governments are pursuing. I also predict some serious, even more serious trouble for European car makers unless the state planners let go of their necks, which I'm not sure will happen, although it might. I'm trying to maintain a balance between what I want to happen and what I think could reasonably happen. And to be honest, I thought that in the UK, the planners from the Starmer government would let go. They would agree to some form of compromise, but they're not. They're
Nope.
being surprisingly stubborn. And I'm afraid this could happen in the European Union as well, which spells serious trouble for car makers. I'm not even sure Volkswagen reached an agreement with its employees. So, did it? This
I
could
don't think
continue.
so, not yet.
I don't know.
Yeah, so there will be trouble in European car making. Maybe in a few years we'll see some of the big ones collapse, because what was it, you, Tammy, who said that they'd have to keep? No, it was David. Sorry, they have to keep subsidizing all this.
Yeah.
And they can't keep subsidizing it because they need to subsidize wind and solar more, because they want more wind and solar, and it's not happening without more money. You cannot have money for everything, even with a printing press. So that's another thing. I think we could have a breakout in oil prices, because nobody knows where Chinese demand will go. And of course, all the mainstream media are biased to downplaying any increase in demand and talking about EVs. And they keep forgetting that, I repeat, because it bears repeating, that this year saw Chinese EV sales represent more than 50%, around or a little bit more than 50% of total car sales for several months in a row. Demand for oil continued to grow. It is really frustrating how nobody pays attention to this. So I foresee a day sometime next year when oil prices will jump and everyone will be extremely surprised, because prediction number 4, OPEC is not going to roll back its cuts. They can't. They can't afford to do that unless they decide to, roll the dice on flooding the market with oil, which I don't think they will do. They could afford it 5 years ago. I'm not sure they can afford it right now, because they're trying to fund their own energy transition efforts. It's just hilarious. And the great thing about a potential increase in oil prices, a price rally, would be that the transition will get even more expensive. And I love the idea of this. I would just accelerate the collapse of the whole thing, which is nice. And also, coal demand will break another record next year.
Yes, it will.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that kind of is linked to what Patrick Devine's comments, where he was talking about between developing new EV vehicles and replacing batteries, the rare earth metal market should skyrocket, right? So if you're mandating this direction and it requires all these materials, and there's all this competition for the same batch of materials, and new ones aren't necessarily coming online, and a certain country, namely China, controls most of that supply chain, the prices will increase and the benefits will accrue to China. For this creates geopolitical issues potentially. So yeah, absolutely bang on with those predictions, Irene. I'll be curious to see how all that turns out in the new year.
I think we'll see soon enough some of these.
Yeah, for sure, especially the January freezing.
Yeah.
The countries that do not adopt natural gas will fail. I'm going to just say that as point blank as I can. If you do not, because in the United States and in other countries, nuclear takes too long, and we're going to, in Texas, we're going to be doubling our grid demand in the next 5 years. We can't even spell nuclear. I mean, our past president, nuclear, we can't spell nuclear without having that done. So countries like Germany, when they can't get natural gas, my prediction is countries that adopt natural gas will be fiscally sound. Those that don't won't.
Or coal. We have lots of coal.
Or coal.
Or coal. Yeah. Especially for reliable power that's controllable and isn't necessarily dependent on foreign sources. Whereas natural gas, it's great for the United States or Canada that has a lot of natural gas. And so therefore it's not much of a security risk. But if you're exporting, ships are
for Africa, I've spoken to a lot of African leaders, and it infuriates me that we have the World Economic Forum and the World Economic Monetary Fund trying to fund renewable energy when we have all the natural gas you could possibly burn, clean natural gas in Africa, and we could set up so that we could export clean burning technology for those power plants and have goods and services made in Africa and really elevate them out to a much better environment. So
that would be we could help just stop toil, as Jasper says,
speaking of that,
help improve agricultural practices and remove some of the harsh physical labor and mechanize it. There's nothing wrong with mechanization. As much as people, it's industrial farming. Well, that's actually what makes it more efficient and takes the strain off people.
Do you feel if these just stop oil clowns glue their hand to a road that it should be cut off? Or let me show. David was laughing at this the other day. Let's show this.
Yeah, I just want to get an axe tag.
Now,
why are they being so gentle?
Should we just hand them a saw and let them chew on their own hand?
Yeah, and he's watching so patiently.
Yeah. There's no pain involved here. Now watch this next one. I think this guy should have been an NBA player because he has the most beautiful fake hand. He cries out for mama when the policeman pulls his hand off. Watch this one.
Hop. Oui, c'est pas trop collé, c'est du goudron. Ça colle pas, mais c'est solide.
Ah, maman! Ah!
Oh, maman! Holy smokes!
C'est super mal! Ah, t'es ouf! Ah!
Y'a rien.
Yeah. And that cop, I love that cop. It's like, yeah.
As I said, he's the new Cristiano Ronaldo.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's just exactly as convincing as Ronaldo is.
Yeah.
I love that cop. Yeah.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Yeah. Okay, so for my predictions, I'm going to start with geopolitical, and that would be Syria and the Middle East. I think that there'll be some new troubles there with Islamic terrorism, and that the oil and gas flows could be jeopardized or be put into question. It's unclear what role Turkey is going to play in all of that, since there was a really great Substack that Roger Pilkey Jr. had linked to the other day, where they were talking about just that entire situation in Syria and how Turkey had been angling to be this hub for natural gas flows from the Middle East into Europe, and how Syria had been a bit of a thorn in the side for that. So it'll be interesting to see how that all works out, because Qatar wanted to put this pipeline that would run through Syria, this massive natural gas field that they have access to, that's not really very developed at this point, and to run that gas by pipeline through Syria into Europe. So that'll be interesting. And related to that, my second prediction will be that the Middle East pushback on climate disclosures and exports to the EU could fuel more resistance, maybe from European countries who feel overwhelmed by this new regulatory burden. It would be nice, like we said earlier, if American companies and Canadian companies would also push back on this, but maybe it takes a country like Qatar to just say no. that will influence the behavior of others in resisting these things. And then I think that the EU and the European Commission, they will do this. They will continue with their ongoing undermining of candidates, representatives, and parties that aren't 100% behind the net zero transition. And you see that with what's been going on in Romania, what's been happening to some extent in Poland, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, in France, and now Germany. So it'll be curious to see if the Alternative for Deutschland party will actually be banned, or if they can't get that legislation passed or whatever before the election, what the EU is going to do, what shenanigans will come up with. Will there be some new fake or whatever reports that they're somehow backed by terrorism or something?
Right.
It remains to be seen. But I think the EU and the EC will continue with their subtle and not so subtle undermining of parties and representatives they don't agree with.
Subtle they're not.
Yeah. And then I think for my number 2 is that there will be higher energy and higher food prices for the EU and the UK, which could lead to civil unrest and government clampdowns on citizens because of, through digital censorship or debanking or whatever. Because in the UK, the farmers are ramping up to do further protests at the end of the month, to maybe even start blocking supermarket warehouses to try and get the public's attention on the different policy changes that this Labour government has brought in. Partially taxation, but there's also a lot of new rules that are coming in and wanting to use up farmland for solar and wind installations and whatnot. So that'll be interesting. So my number 1 prediction, which is linked to what Patrick's saying here, if America's economy is unleashed through less regulation, through lower taxes, through increased energy production, with reliable and affordable power, then the progressive movement's net zero transition, especially as it's identified in the EU and UK, all of that will be in jeopardy. All bets are off, right? And so then look for all sorts of lawfare, different kinds of litigation, whether it's internationally or federally or even statewide in the United States, to slow it down or to stop it altogether, all with the intent to undermine the dynamism of the American economy. Because if you don't have to follow all of this intense regulatory and taxation burden that EU companies have to face, and they can set up shop in the United States, they will do it. And
Yes.
we've already seen like the chemical firms shifting to China or shifting to the United States where they can make a profit. And, if America gets back to this idea that making profits isn't bad, that it actually helps people, helps the economy, that kind of thing, then all bets are off. So my number 1 prediction will be that if Trump is able to do the changes that he wants to do, it'll upset the whole apple cart.
Yeah. And I caution everyone about that. That's not going to be an immediate thing. It's going to take time to roll back some of these more pernicious efforts by the Biden administration. And so give it a year or two and see where we are.
The Biden administration is laying landmines right now, and they have undercut. They have done some horrific things to the world. I'll just say that right now.
Yep.
They are pathetic.
Yeah.
Well, and I would like to throw a wild card in there, and that's the Russia-Ukraine issue. And I know Stu had some comments on that, but I keep thinking, let's say that the Russian-Ukraine war is settled when Trump gets in. What's going to be the fallout in terms of Russia's relationship with Europe? Right now, they've seized assets and bank accounts and are redistributing it to Ukraine. as some kind of reparations to rebuild or whatever. What happens to that? Will will Russians be removed from whatever blacklist they've been put on? Right. So will
They're
energy
working
trade
on the
resume?
next package of sanctions as we speak.
Right.
Tammy,
So
I'll go out on a limb and just say, if you don't use cheap Russian natural gas, you will fail as a fiscal responsible country, period. There's nothing that will change that. You can't, let's take France. France has not, they don't have the money to rebuild their nuclear fleet. They're charging Germany extra for that money to rebuild their nuclear fleet. Germany is going to, they're going to survive.
Yeah.
But Germany's going to just go right into fourth world status.
Well, it's an interesting format of redistributing the wealth, right? Because Germany has had this wealth, and now France gets its share, Norway gets its share. Anybody that Germany's buying energy from, they're basically redistributing German wealth.
And Norway has natural gas.
Right.
But
I mean, Stu, you make a point about fiscal responsibility, but when ideology gets in the way, fiscal responsibility is like second tier.
Fiscal responsibility is an impediment to the goal. The goal is the collapse of these economies. That's the goal.
Yeah.
And because that makes it easier to implement a totalitarian state in these countries. That's the whole goal of this entire energy transition project, is to collapse these economies, implement totalitarian governments that the globalists can manage, and have people living our little small lives in fear and deprivation, because that populations who are afraid and living in fear and deprivation are easier to control. And that's the overarching goal of this whole thing. It's why we're seeing Germany and the UK governments intentionally deindustrializing their economies and shipping all their emissions off to China. And, so it's a feature of this whole thing. It's not a glitch. So the guys like Macron doesn't care that they don't have money to rebuild their nuclear fleet. That's part of his mission.
Yeah, he may be out on the street before long too. So,
well, maybe, but he's managed to survive, even though, last year's election, and they are very creative at devising ways of holding on to power.
Yeah, especially when they can do their cordon sanitaires, right? And they do it in Germany, they do it in every country. So that anybody who would even think of resisting, they get marginalized and no one will form a coalition. So my second wild card, though, is somewhat related, and that is Energy Fortress North America. Because if we have a change of government in Canada, where energy security is really high on the list, including getting rid of carbon tax and all the other ridiculousness that has been the last 9 years, and Trump's in power, then there's a whole new vision for what North America could be with respect to energy production and maybe more reliable power supplies. I don't know, but
you mean Trudeau is the governor of Canada?
Well, he wouldn't be there anymore.
No, he wouldn't.
That was what Trump was trolling him with.
Yeah, I know. But the problem in Canada is somewhat similar to the EU in that there's currently 5 parties in the parliament, and the Conservative one has about 35 to 37% of the vote. Trudeau's party has about 32%. And then the NDP and the Greens and the Bloc have their various percentages that make up the rest. But the way the first past the post system works, you can get these seats that barely win, but they still get that representation. And then you have what we have now with the Socialist NDP party, with the Socialist Light Liberal party forming a coalition to stop the Conservatives from being in power. So there is a concern that unless there's an overwhelming victory across the country, then it'll be very difficult for the conservatives to form power. We'll just have another left-wing coalition. So
Oh,
not
this is
not
so
a
nice.
given.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Patrick has a great comment there. Western Canada secedes from the East and Trump becomes president of Western Canada.
That's my suggestion. I think Trump needs to stop talking about annexing Canada and just focus on Alberta. Be done
Well,
with that.
I mean, the problem is, let's say if the West seceded and then joined the United States as a state or something, there's no guarantee that 4 years from now it will be a reasonable president there, and then
Right.
be
Yeah.
confronted with the same kinds of madness that you guys have been subjected to for the past 4 years.
And there's
And
also the
Obama
big
was in it.
complication that Canada, is basically a, what is it called? A protectorate of the United Kingdom?
No.
What is the nature of its affiliation with the United? I mean, the King of England is also the King of Canada, right?
Yes, but that's based on our Constitution and being a constitutional monarchy. So we're still an independent country, even though we still have the Commonwealth allegiance to the United Kingdom.
Okay.
Until you
So-
read the financial documents.
Yeah, well, we have a bill that was passed after Quebec tried to separate twice, where they formalized and legalized the process. So
Yeah.
there is a process in place if you wanted to separate that that Western Canada could follow, if that was their choice. But I mean,
Kind
there
of
would
like
need to be a
Texas,
referendum.
David. Texas is the only state that could legally secede from the Union.
Well, theoretically.
Well, why haven't you already?
Theoretically.
I'm sorry, what?
Why haven't you already?
That's a good question. It arises in my mind quite often, as you can imagine.
Yeah, probably.
Parasites typically don't
Yeah,
care
very
much for their health
Yeah.
of their host. Lefty politicians are like that too. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And
The
Robert
beating-
says, Canada under Trudeau, where the beatings will continue until morale improves. Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. Hey, can I throw out another wild card since we were talking about wild cards? Is I read the other day that the Biden administration is going to end with about $500 billion in the Treasury of undedicated funds from all these big, massive spending bills. And a big chunk of that relates to all these green energy subsidy provisions in the IRA, and there was $160 billion in the infrastructure bill too. And my view is, I think it's a wild card that you're going to see the Trump administration using all sorts of executive branch means to reallocate a bunch of that subsidy money to other purposes, including funding the building of the border wall along the southern border, because the Energy Department and EPA and the Interior Department have kind of been, jointly in charge of distributing all these monies, grants and everything, to all these non-viable business, startups that are all going to go bankrupt. And they've been very slow about it. And so there's an awful lot of money, $500 billion, that has yet to be allocated to any specific purpose. And I suspect you're going to see the Trump administration go about reallocating a bunch of that stuff to purposes outside of what the legislation says. And they did that.
Use it to pay the
Everyone
debt.
needs to remember, if you're scoffing at that, remember that Trump reallocated $4-point-something billion from the Pentagon budget to finance the border wall in his first administration. So
Yeah.
there is the means of doing this, and I suspect there's going to be a highly dedicated effort related to this $500 billion.
Yeah. That's an interesting prospect. You'd think that they could use it to pay the debt, but that's not going to happen.
That would be fun, wouldn't it?
Oh, by the way, Volkswagen and its employees reached an agreement on December 20th.
Oh, they did.
did?
Okay, I missed that.
Yeah, according to AP, and I don't know. They'll be slashing manufacturing capacity, and the employees are taking a bit of a pay cut, and they will shed jobs through early retirement.
That's not going to solve their problem. Yeah, they can't sell enough cars of the kind that governments want.
They're being
them to
mandated.
sell.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I'm looking. Did you see Patrick's comment, the last one there? Trump could cut DOD, DEI funding and divert the money to restart the border wall.
Ooh,
That's
snap.
a good idea.
Yeah. Doge.
There
That's
you
what
go.
Doge will be looking at, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, yes, definitely. Let's see. David, just curious, have you ever attended the North American Prospect Expo in Houston? Just wondered whether it would be beneficial for someone like myself who've been working regulatory. Yes, it's definitely useful, Travis L. NAPE is a wonderful conference, one of the premier energy-related conferences held each year. Stu and I and RT Trevino had a whole booth at the last NAPE conference, doing podcasts and stuff from the floor there. It has a terrific agenda, presentations and speakers that is always well worth taking in. I've spoken at that 3 times, I think, in the past, but I've kind of retired myself from going to those things. But I highly recommend NAPE. It's one of the few I would highly recommend.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'll be there. And we did, I think, 35 to 40 podcasts at that booth. That was fun. Everything from Doomberg, and everybody wanted to line up to see the chicken, the green chicken. David wrangled him in. So that was good.
Yeah, RT interviewed George P. Bush on the floor of NAPE.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's it for our predictions. Do we have stories we want to cover really quickly, or
we have a minute and a half? Maybe we should postpone that part to next week.
Yeah, why don't we do that next week? But you know, Irina, this is what the green energy policy thinks that green energy is. You know, when they sit back and we have green energy, this is what the left thinks.
It's about as realistic as the transition, yes.
Right.
But he's cooking with gas. No,
but this is what they believe in their mind.
Vegetarian too.
Right. And here's what actually happens during the energy transition. This is the energy transition in reality.
In reality. Here we go.
Okay.
Pesto chicken pasta?
So just imagine if that was.
You don't like it? Milo on a French fry?
Is the energy transition. Okay, you can look at that. Okay. Watch this one. Okay. Do you want to pay more for electricity? Oh, no, wait a minute. No, I don't want to pay more. Do you want to wait 4 hours to charge your car? No. So that is a stark contrast between what the left thinks the energy transition is, and here's what the actual transition is. They don't want to pay for it, but they want somebody else's money to pay for it. I love Robert. We're going to have a great New Year,
Robert. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All right. With that, we are going to have a great year, guys.
Thank y'all. This is
see you guys. See you next week.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, and